Well, here we are in the studio with one of the greats here in South Australian football. No doubt everyone, if you're a Crows fan, would have loved this bloke, seeing him on the ground. Years ago, he's now in the FIVEaa shirt and working each and every day on the FIVEaa Sports Show. We speak of Mark Bickley, the two-time Premiership captain of the Crows. Welcome, Bix.
Sam, how are you?
I'm fantastic. Thanks for joining us on the Press Box, mate.
My pleasure. Can't wait.
Now, we're obviously joined by you because we've asked you to do a little favour for us, so we hope that we can get some juicy stuff out of you.
Yeah, I'm sure you can.
Plenty of stuff to look back on, I'm sure, in terms of your career and stuff. But first, let's just quickly look at the Crows right now, I suppose. In a quick summation, where are they at?
Well, I'm a little bit disappointed where they're at right at the moment. At the start of the year, I thought that last year was an aberration. I thought that Adelaide would be really right up there, challenging for the top four, if not the top two. They had a perfect pre-season. The whole pre-season, we heard that they were. It had been really perfect for them. Most of the players had done it all. They had a lot of fun. They'd put last year behind them, but unfortunately, just some of their more experienced players just haven't been able to find the form that I guess we've come to expect. And I think Josh Jenkins is in that group, of course, Bryce Gibbs. Both of those guys finished in the top six in the best and fairest last year. Walker hasn't reached the heights we'd expect, and along with a couple of others. So pretty disappointing. And they sit in 8th spot, and to me, that's probably where they are right now as a footy club. They're gonna struggle and they're gonna fight to try and finish in the bottom half of the 8. But it's unless they improve a fair bit over the next month or two, I reckon that's probably where they end up at the end of the year.
And Mark, what can you put their poor start to the season down to? Is there one thing that you think stands out as to why they've started so poor with their form?
Look, I don't think losing Sam Jacobs has been a good thing for them, and they really haven't delivered the ball into their forward 50 anywhere near what they were like in 2017. They were the highest scoring team in 2017. I know there's some change in personnel with Cameron and McGovern there, but since those guys have left, the year after in 2018, Walker had a very interrupted year, as did Tom Lynch. Just think the chemistry's now changed. I think Eddie Betts is slightly older and he's not as consistent as what he had been in those first 3 or 4 years. As I said, Walker and Jenkins are both struggling. Lynch has been solid. And then you've got this group of younger players who are all trying to find their feet. Gallucci, Lockie Murphy, Riley Knight really hasn't cemented his spot. So just lacking something that they had a couple of years back.
Now, everyone talks about the forward line, Bix, but I think it's defence, like with Lever leaving to Melbourne and then Dode going down. Yeah. It's a few holes there to fill in too.
Yeah, look, I haven't been as concerned about the defence. I think they've done a wonderful job. Tom Dode just filled in the spot that was left by Jake Lever, and then this year it's been Alex Keith who's been able to hold that spot down. I think Daniel Talia's been really solid. Brodie Smith, who was missing last year, coming back in, he's been solid. Rory Laird, perhaps you could say, hasn't quite reached the heights that he was at last year. But for me, their defence has held their own. They haven't conceded a whole lot of goals. It's really the ability to I guess, transform or to convey the clearances they get through the middle, and they haven't quite been as dominant as what they've been in years gone by. But transferring that to the forward half, that's been the area they've fallen down.
Now, Bix, you're a dual Premiership captain. You know the heat that comes with the top job. Is the scrutiny surrounding Tex warranted, do you think?
Oh, look, I think that the incident that everyone's seen is an isolated one, and it's going to create an attention because there is just so much more of a spotlight on footballers today. When I played, I think there might have been one footy show, which was, the Mike Sheehan, Bruce McAvaney.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, on the couch, and that was it. There's probably 4 or 5 shows now that are all vying for attention, and if you do something that stands out, particularly if you're a senior player, particularly if you're not playing well, particularly if your team surrenders a 5-goal lead, that was always going to be, a really high-profile incident. The only thing I'd say to that is it's a bit like a pile-on at the moment. Everyone's taking a whack at him. I just hope that he understands that it was one area. It's not a strength of his game. He just has to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And as the leader, that's what comes with the territory. If you're putting yourself up there to be the person who sets the standards, who monitors the standards, who really leads by example. You can't afford to do that, and so he's copped his whack this week. Hopefully, he responds in a really strong fashion, and I'm pretty certain that he will. He's got really strong character, so I expect him to come out and have a good game this week.
Was there ever a time in your captaincy that you did something like Tex where you didn't quite lead by example?
There was a time when, I think it was early in '98, where the first couple of trial matches I just struggled to find the footy and get back into form. I remember having a meeting with Malcolm Blight, and back then I think we played 3 or 4 pre-season games, and he told me to have a week off. So have a week off, I think it was the 3rd pre-season game, and then he said, come back, set yourself and play really well in the last pre-season game. And he just gave me a little reminder. He said, look, I'm not in the habit of dropping Premiership captains, but that's not to say I won't do it. So and he had a bit of a smile on his face, and I wasn't sure whether he was joking or whether that was fair dinkum, but I tell you what, I was pretty keen to play that last pre-season match pretty well, and I got in the best players and was picked, and then away we went from there.
Don't gloat too much, but certainly one thing in particular a lot of people talk about is Malcolm Blight and yourself, and the chemistry, I suppose, the combination. It was almost like a dream for the Crows at that time. How do you think you can put into words your relationship with Malcolm Blight, and how, I suppose, the power in that team? You were the captain and he was the coach, and some people say the captain has more power sometimes in teams than the coach does. Who held that in that?
Well, look, that was not much dispute there. Malcolm was certainly had the power in that relationship, and look, it was slightly different. It was much more autocratic when I played, in terms of the coach was the coach, and he really set the agenda, he set the rules, and it was like he says jump and you say how high. So we hadn't quite transformed into that leadership group, having the input from the players. Yes, he confided in the players sometimes, but my main role was just making sure, one, that when the coach wasn't around, that there was someone looking out and making sure everything was being done right. And secondly, just that conduit between the team and the coach. There were times when we sat down and we'd talk about certain things that were going on within the team, but by and large, he really ran the show, and my sort of thoughts in my head was always just set the best example possible. So if there were team rules, if there was a way that he wanted people to train or to do things, that was just my role to carry them out to the letter, and then that way nobody could question you, and then when you did have to have a go at someone or try and pull someone in the line, you were sort of beyond reproach.
I remember we spoke about this, must have been off air at some stage a little while ago, and we were talking about you receiving the captaincy, and I remember you having a sense of almost surprise when you spoke about the moment you were given that role.
Look, I guess, once again, if you go back to 1997, it was a different time, because if you looked at pretty much the captain of every team was the best player in every team, and I was never Adelaide's best player, and we had a great team, and with great older players and some great younger players coming through. So it was the sort of first appointment of a bloke who was just the things I spoke about before, who really represented what it was to be to live the values of the team. And so that was a bit of a challenge for me, because, like I said, Wayne Carey, every other team just had the best player. Stuart Lowe for St Kilda, and so when the game was in the balance, everyone just expected that the leader would stand up and win the game for the team. But I certainly that wasn't me. But what I was tried to do was just make sure that when the game was in the balance, that I was in the ears of the people who could influence the game, and making sure that they were concentrating on the right things. And we were so lucky. We had blokes like Mark Rasciuto and Sean Wren and Andrew McLeod, and then great older players like Darren Jarman and David Pittman and Nigel Smart. So my job was never really all that difficult. The only thing that I did have to do at times was Malcolm could be rather abrasive, and there were times when sometimes he was really harsh on the players. So I was always very conscious of making sure that if someone did cop a bake or a spray, that I was there to sometimes just make sure they were okay with it all and understood where Malcolm was coming from.
That's a timely thing you've just brought up. We did speak earlier today on a show with Jenny Williams, who is a sports psychologist and understands, how the best way to basically bake a player in this modern age is. And Malcolm basically did it in a way, I suppose, with you guys, which was a little different to others.
Well, look, I think he did it the way everyone did it in that era, which was just yell and scream at people if you weren't happy. And I think, to be fair, if you look at where that comes from. I think so. Malcolm was coached by Ron Barassi, the great Ron Barassi, and I think we've all seen footage of him being quite demonstrative. And Ron Barassi was coached by Norm Smith, and apparently Norm Smith was that. So you can see how it's just been passed down, and that was just really the norm. And we all just were a bit more thick-skinned back then, and we just copped it on the chin and tried to pick out of it the bits that you thought were fair and just moved on. But it's a different age now, and I guess even through my time, as I was finishing and as I started coaching, you had to be much more cognizant of the way that your feedback was going to be received by people, because not everyone responds really positively to being screamed at, just like in any other job. I think most of the management styles have changed in the last 20 years.
Now, this year, both of our teams have co-captains. If you were back in the day when you were Crows captain, if Blighty or whoever came in and said, we need someone else to help you out, how would you have responded?
I don't think it would have bothered me, to be quite honest. And it's interesting because back then there was no such thing as a leadership group. But when I think back, I guess it's not really the most hygienic thing, but we used to have a communal bath. And after of course we trained at night after work, so you come off the track around 8 o'clock and it'd be freezing cold. Everyone would just pile into the communal bath, and that was our leadership group. The 5 or 6 older guys would get the spot in there, and if anyone was having issues or were playing well, that's where we solved all the problems of the world. So we had a pseudo leadership group back then, and that's where we solved all the issues.
Now, Bix, you did take over as the coach for the Crows for a little bit. Have you completely ruled out going back and being a coach in the system, the AFL system again?
Yes, well and truly. Not so much me ruling myself out. I just feel like if you're out of the system for the period of time that I have been, which is 4 or 5 years, I don't think there is really any going back from here. I think you really need to stay involved in some way in the system. So it's interesting because we've got now Rhys Shaw taking over as an interim coach, and it's a really interesting position to be in, because you're taking over. You don't really have time to be able to bring what your game style looks like, because you've really practiced the whole pre-season playing it one way. So you can make some subtle changes, and you can try and impart some of your personality on the team, but there's not a whole lot you can do. And look, when we look back in history, apart from Paul Roos, who I think was the interim coach at Sydney and went on to have success, the world of AFL is littered with interim coaches that do it for 6 weeks in my case, 12 weeks in Rhys Shaw's case. John Barker, there's been lots and lots of them that generally don't go on to have huge success. Of course, Matthew Primus did it for a short period at Port Adelaide, got the job, and then ended up not finishing ideally. So if I was sort of suggesting to someone, if you wanted to seriously be a contender for that job, I wouldn't be putting my hand up to be the interim coach.
What if Don Pike rang you tomorrow and said, Bix, I want to win a premiership with this team. You've been there before. You know what it's been like. You know how to talk to these players. You know what it goes through to get there. Can you come on board as some sort of a mentor or some sort of small coaching role to help these players out to make sure we can achieve the ultimate success? What
I would say to that is Don Pike's won as many premierships as I have, and I just feel like this is such a big industry, and everything is measured to the inch and controlled to the inch. I just feel like having part-timers who come and go, I just feel like that's not a realistic thing. I love and have been doing some mentoring with some younger players that are trying to get drafted, and some other people around the place that just trying to help them and guide them. So I quite enjoy doing sort of that one-on-one mentoring. But in terms of a formal position at the club, I absolutely don't think that's going to happen.
Now, last night there was a mid-season draft. Fan or not a fan?
Look, it's bittersweet. I can understand totally a club like West Adelaide, who have been decimated, two of their best players. They've only had one win for the year, so now they've lost two midfielders, and I can understand how that is tough. But at the same time, my philosophy has always been you'd never stand in the way of anyone fulfilling or getting an opportunity to fulfil their dream. And when you saw there was a young guy who got drafted to Sydney with the last pick of the night, and when it came out, he was in a room with his friends and his family. They exploded. Mum was crying. He was overcome with emotion. You can see how much that means to him. So I understand that, yes, there's some downside to it, But at the same time, I just think you just cannot stand in the way. But I think what will happen, this is the first year, and I think it's been hurriedly put together.
Yeah.
I think what we'll find next year is when West Adelaide go to recruit a player, that'll be one of the questions I'll ask, and they will say, will you be putting your name in the mid-season draft? And maybe they might look elsewhere. Maybe they might say, well, we can't pay you as much because there's a chance we're going to lose you. Maybe they might say, if we're going to spend $10,000 to relocate you from Victoria to come and live here, you will have to pay half that back if you leave halfway through. I think there'll be clubs will go in with their eyes more widely open, I think. But it's not ideal for the sample. There's no doubt about that.
I'd love to talk about the premierships that you did win very briefly, because I'm sure you get asked about it a lot and you've spoken about it plenty of times. But the best moment for you, like what was it when you won 97? I'm sure the very first time was so special. The second time would have been special another way. What was the best moment or moments for you where you soaked it up and it was real?
Oh, look, there's so many really. Like I guess the first 30 seconds after the siren blows is just the most sort of remarkable adrenaline rush that you've ever felt, because it's just like, firstly, there's disbelief. In my case as well, I left Port Pirie 6 or 7 years earlier, hoping to get a game at a SANFL club, and then within 7 years captaining an AFL Premiership. So wow. I couldn't believe it, and it just took a little bit of time to settle in. But then that next 3 or 4 minutes where every person you look at, you have a special connection with. So Nigel Smart, for example, Nigel and I both played at South Adelaide in 1989, where we won 2 or 3 games and we trained in conditions that weren't great, and then our careers sort of transformed and went to Adelaide, and then we're the vice captain and captain of a premiership side. So I looked at him, and that meant something special. There were other players that you'd shared things with, whether it's, you might have been through rehab together, or there's some guys that you'd spent a whole lot of time, Rod Jamison and David Pittman, guys that were your own age that you'd sort of toiled with, guys that you'd played a lot of footy early on, where we got belted by 20 and 30 goals against a lot of the Victorian clubs. So there was just a different connection with each player. So that was the really special time. And then the next year was slightly different, because I didn't play all that well personally in 1997. So, your pride, you get back there the next year and you always want to be someone who you can say that you played okay in the big game. Yeah. So I'd really set myself to make sure I played better. And I had I thought I had a really good game in 98. So that was really satisfying for me as well, to feel like I made a much greater contribution the next year.
Now, you won 2 flags, but the truth is you probably should have won 3.
Oh no, we're not going down this.
Now, you were 6 goals up in the 93 prelim. 7 goals up in the 92 prelim. You're playing the Bombers. You're going in at half-time, and all of a sudden something derails the rest of your game and the season.
You've got the story slightly wrong. It wasn't so much going in. We'd gone in, we'd all done what we had to do, and you have a drink and you just calm yourself, you get all your instructions. And then it was the one sort of last final coming together where Graham Corns was the coach. He got everyone in. And the one where the coach stands in the middle and everyone just sort of, gets huddles in really tight. And I may have just let a little tiny one. Yeah.
It must have been an atomic.
Slip out. Yeah.
Some radiation.
Well, I don't know what happened, but anyway, from all reports, I didn't think it was that big a deal, but many of the guys say that it had a very unsettling effect on the team. Of course, we went out and we surrendered the 7-goal lead. We lost the prelim final. The Bombers went on to win the flag. And, I must say, I did have a guilty conscience. I didn't say anything, because a lot of people after the game, like, when we're all doing the post-mortems very late at night, it did come out, who did that at half-time? And I was quiet. And it wasn't until I reckon it was after we won the flag, that I was happy enough and comfortable enough in my own skin to say, well, we finally scaled the mountain. I can now put my hand up and say that, it was me. And
it was a little
did you change? I was just going to say, did you change your pre-game ritual for those first 2 months?
Back then, what was happening was there was a product called Masashi, which was like an amino acid supplement that Greg Anderson, who was playing with us, he was the sales rep, so we were getting free amino acids. And it just really had that sort of effect on you at different times, and that was one. I think it was called the Growling Dog was the name of the supplement I was taking. Quite appropriate, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, there we go. I think unless you guys have got anything more. That's right.
I was actually going to say, we've seen the Crows reach the heights of 2017. We've seen Don Pike take this Crows side as far as they can possibly go. Do you think he's the right man to get there again?
Look, without being inside the inner sanctum, like, who would know? One of the things that the big question I would have is their list capable of getting back to 2017? Now, right now, if you think that Eddie Betts has just ticked over the other side of the mountain, he's still a champion player, but struggled to just get that consistency that he's had for probably 4 years, where he's kicked, 50, 60, 70, 50, and then last year he had a bit of a down year, and then, of course, this year he's been in and out. Taylor Walker, 29, a little bit the same. Josh Jenkins approaching 30. Sam Jacobs, 31. If you were to say those players are coming down the other side of the mountain and their best footy's behind them, is there enough A-graders coming through the system to be able to get them back up there pretty quickly? So I think they need to do some recruiting and trading to really supplement their list. I love Brodie Smith. I love the Crouch brothers. I think Keith is a real find. We love Laird. Tom Lynch has still got a lot of good footy. The ruck is an issue for me. Riley O'Brien is a very young ruckman, still got some deficiencies in his game. I think Talia and the defence can stand up. Wayne Miller, I think, has got A-grader written all over him. So there's just a few little spots for me they need to address, and they need some more running power around the ball as well.
Now, in your advertiser column a couple of weeks ago, you touted that to throw the kitchen sink at Brodie Grundy. Is that the answer?
Yeah, the kitchen sink, the kettle, the fridge, the microwave,
the whole kitchen.
Holiday house.
Exactly right. Kangaroo Island, I think Rowie said at the time. At 25 years of age, most ruckmen are just approaching sort of maturity at that stage. So I think he's got 5 to 7 years of football in front of him. I would be moving heaven and earth to get him back home. He's almost suggested he's open to the idea. He said at some stage I want to come back to Adelaide. He's got a South Australian girlfriend. So I just feel like Adelaide at the moment, where they are, they potentially are holding the number 1 pick, which Carlton have traded to them. This, to me, if there is any chance at all, they must do everything they can to get him here.
Now, I said last week to these boys 1.5 million a year, and they laughed at me. Do you agree with me?
Absolutely. Whatever.
Oh,
now, here's
wow.
the thing. Here's the thing. Just do it. Just do the 1.5. There'll be a new rights deal,
TV deal coming
in a couple of years, and it's a little bit like a couple of years ago when Buddy Franklin, what was he? 10 years for $10 million. Like $1 million a year now. There's probably 15 players on $1 million a year. So as the rights expand, and who knows what Google and Amazon and all those, Facebook might pay for the TV rights. He might be cheap. He might be an Alistair Lynch Mark II.
There you go.
Well, fingers
I'll
crossed.
rest my case.
Fingers crossed he comes through.
Really. It was a little bit of a stretch.
I think you included a number of picks in there too. It made it outrageous. But anyway, Bix, we really do appreciate your time for coming in. Mate, we could have gone on for another half an hour, but really, there's so much we could have gotten through. But you've achieved so much, and you've taken the time to sit down with us here on the press box. We appreciate that, and good luck for the rest of the year with all our radio duties.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.